Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're doing well today. I just got done watching a straight to streaming, low budget horror film that I heard a lot about from one of my good friends telling me that they saw an early screening of this and thought that it was a really great film and that I should check it out. So I was really hyped to do so, and I went and bought it on Vudu and I watched it, and I literally just got done watching it and I have a lot to say. But the film in question is Haunt Season. Now, Haunt Season was written and directed by first-time feature film director Jake Jarvie. And I don't know much about the guy, but I looked on his IMDb page. He was featured in the movie Old School from 2003, and he did something else that I never even heard of. And apparently, he is kind of known out there, I guess, in the YouTube realm for the other thing I don't know about that he did. And some people are kind of familiar with his work. So I guess his talent kind of brought this movie some word of mouth. And my friend said he saw it and said it was one of his favorite films of 2024. As for me, I can appreciate a lot about the movie, but I want to go as far to say that. I want to go as far to say that, but here's the thing. For a first-time film director, for a low-budget horror film made in 2024 that was pretty much straight to streaming, I have to commend the people behind this movie, especially Jake Jarvie. I'll probably check out more of his stuff in the future because the guy has tremendous directing talent, and I can clearly see that with this movie. But I think in the future, the scripts might need some work. So, with that out the way, I'm going to get into a brief plot synopsis without giving too much away. I'm going to try to be as spoiler-free as possible because this movie's so new. I don't want to really give a lot away here. But the general gist of the film is that it's about this woman named Matilda, and she's like a young, fresh out of college, student age, and she's in Chicago, Illinois, and she is auditioning for this role at a local haunt attraction. And this haunt attraction is attached to a bowling alley and a mini golf course on its property. And it's run by this eccentric runner that I guess owns the bowling alley as well. And also is the bartender at the bowling alley, as you'll see later on in the movie. And she gets a part in the haunt attraction because she can scream really loud. And off the bat, she gets to meet pretty much the entire cast of the rest of the film. And you really get to see the sense of character writing, which I think Jake Jarvie does very well in this movie. All these characters have great chemistry together, and they all have distinct personalities, especially the ones that we get to spend a lot of focus on in the movie, or I guess some brief yet poignant focus. And this is all brought upon for her character, going back to Matilda, because in the cold open, in the title credits sequence, we get to see a girl pretty much getting brutally murdered. Of course, in like a flash frame kind of sequence. But that's, I guess, the expository scene to start the movie off. And the girl supposedly went up and went missing. Nobody else at the haunt attraction knows about it. So that's why they need to replace her with Matilda. Well, Matilda, she gets dressed up in hair and makeup. She gets this prosthetic wig, and she meets her partner that's going to be, role-playing with her that night in the specific room she's in. And he's going to be holding a knife up to her head while her hair is being peeled back and gives the gruesome effect like she's being scalped, essentially. And they're having fun doing so. And then while all the customers are done going through the attraction, the night ends. But beforehand, there may or may not have been a random killing of a certain person. And after the night ends, the person who does the makeup stays behind, and we get to see something happen with her. And let's just say it could be grisly. Kind of. But nonetheless, the characters, at least the main character, Matilda, she befriends all these girls that she's become cohorts with, and in that one brief night of working. And we get to see that she's living in her car, and these girls invite her out to go to an escape room at the mall. They meet up together, I guess, to hang out, get to know each other, and try to bond at least before Halloween night, which is going to be the final night of the haunt attraction for the season, and everybody's going to go on their separate ways and do what they do for the rest of the year. And Matilda is like, all right, well, I'll join along. But when they go to the escape room, something might happen to a supposed worker that works there that might be estranged with the haunt attraction from the events prior, where they had a bad falling out, and you start to kind of see where the movie's trying to go. It's trying to throw some red herrings and misdirections at certain characters or some suspects because it's a whodunit slasher. And we get more slice of life moments where all these people are hanging out. There's like a house party scene where everybody's commingling, and you get to really dive into these characters' personalities. Like there's this random nudist guy that is all about showing off his penis because he wants to take penis back from having a bad name. Yeah, and I'll say this up front. If you are not a fan of like modern aesthetics in horror films, like, you know, selfies, mentions of OnlyFans and stuff like that, this is probably not going to be a movie for you, because some of the jokes and the humor is predicated on, I guess, modern feminism, which is, I think it's parodying a lot of like young culture these days because of how it's executed. And I don't know if that's intentional or not, but if you can see the humor in it because it feels like it's parodying that kind of stuff, then I think you would like it. But nonetheless, the characters start noticing that these people have gone missing, specifically one girl named Rosemary. And Rosemary might have had a relationship with the girl in the cold open, and she's really worried about her, and she hasn't been able to get in contact. And then they realize that, hey, this other person disappeared. Hey, this other person disappeared, right? And it boils down to a point of the story where the characters are all kind of hanging out before the events of Halloween, and some more people might bite the dust, and we randomly get the killer reveal, like smack dab right before the climax, and we find out who the killer is. And this plays into the final act of the climax when they're all there at the haunted house attraction on Halloween night. And since we know who the killer is, we were kind of expecting a big reveal with that, which doesn't really happen, but we do get some over-the-top shenanigans, and it does get kind of batshit and wild and all over the place. And it's kind of like, you know, pointing at the audience, hey, the characters who are in the know are in the know, and the ones who aren't, they'll soon find out, kind of thing. But, you know, this builds up tension, I guess, and it ends in a wild final act. And right after the final act ends in the climax, the movie pretty much wraps up almost seamlessly right after that. And we get to see from the characters who are possibly still around what's going to be entailed for their future. And I'm not going to go any further than that. But nonetheless, that's what you're going to expect out of Haunt Season. Now, Haunt Season is only an hour and 21 minutes long. And I'm going to say this off the bat. This movie has a brilliant pace to it. I forgot I was watching a movie while I was watching it because it just flew by so quickly. So it made this experience a bit better. If this movie was like, you know, 2 hours long or pushing over that, I probably wouldn't have been into it as much as I was. But to give Jake Jarvie some credit, because he wrote and directed this movie, I'm going to say this off the bat, starting with the writing. I love how natural all the characters come across in this movie. There's so many scenes that just genuinely feel like real people talking, and that's so hard to capture in film. There's a handful of movies that I have ever seen that actually feel like real people talking. Because most of the time when you're script writing, you can clearly tell that there's some polishedness going on with how they're talking to each other. This movie really does execute natural dialogue very well. I'm going to say this off the bat with the performances. I know none of these actors, but they were all pretty good. There was no real bad acting in this movie. You can tell that all of them look like they're kind of amateurish, maybe some unknowns out there. And I'm not trying to say because they're unknown, they're amateurs or anything. But specifically, the main character, Matilda, her actress, I think her name is Sarah Elizabeth. I looked it up on IMDb. She was actually pretty good, and I wouldn't mind seeing her in some more horror films. I think that might be a good stepping stone for her career if she wants to branch out into feature films, to get into maybe some higher budget horror films, because she was actually pretty enthralling and pretty easy to look at too. So that does help the movie. And I will say this as a final note to the writing. There's something going on with this movie that just really executes that slice of life in that 80s throwback kind of way, where, you know, when we get into the 90s version of what became of slashers, it became more of like a uniform movies had to put on to replicate a certain slasher franchise out there. You already know what I'm talking about. We're talking about Scream here. But as time has gone on, that uniform has kind of changed and altered. You know, it became about sleaziness in the 2000s, and then in the 2010s, it became about, you know, generic popcorn flick stuff. Nowadays, it's starting to go back into the 80s again, where they're like, hey, we just need to do slice of life, funny teenager stuff, and that's what people want, right? This movie executes the slice of life, and it spends a lot of time and focus on characters, and it realizes that slashers, at the end of the day, while we're all here for the killer and the kills most of the time, and the gore, we do have to spend a lot of time with the characters. And that also feeds into why the characters were so good, because the film spent a lot of focus on showcasing how they are organically without going into too many cliche backstory stuff and, you know, expected by the book measures taken with the characters. No, it all felt natural. So yeah, in terms of writing, it was kind of refreshing on that front. My biggest compliments to this film, however, go to the directing ability of Jake Jarvie. I was blown away by how good this movie looked. If Jake Jarvie, if you're watching this, seriously take this as a compliment. Dude, you have some really good cinematography chops. I don't know if you had a cinematographer on hand that specializes in this stuff kind of helping you out, but you have a natural eye for camera angles and certain visuals to bring out scenes in a unique way that I was severely impressed by the camera work. Given the budget of the movie that you had to work with, this was absolutely great. Honestly, the color corrections look phenomenal. And like I said, I have seen some really ambitious low-budget horror movies in my time, kind of trying to go that art house route. And sometimes that lands. I want to say this movie's art house or anything, but there is certain shots where I'm just like, damn, that is actually really good shit. And yeah, I love how this movie looks and how it's shot. It's just so addicting to watch for that. You know, it's hard to explain unless you see it, but you'll see what I'm saying if you watch it. And whether we're talking about the music of the movie is low budget, but it's pretty good, right? And this kind of all feeds into the ambiance of the film and the setting of it. I loved the setting of this movie. I love the haunt attraction. I know this is kind of a popular, subgenre trend going on, especially since like 2016, where we get all these haunt attractions and we get Halloween themed movies where you go to a Halloween carnival or whatever. But this movie really did have a genuine feeling setting. It really felt like an actual haunt you would go to in your own hometown. It didn't feel like this make-believe, escapism thing that you see in movies where it's much larger than life than what it is in reality. Now, this was very grounded in reality on that front, and it had a killer atmosphere going for it. And for a movie set outside of Chicago, I don't know if it's believable, but there are some Dwight Little Midwest-style shots in the movie to give you a sense that the Midwest is feeling the autumn, so to speak, and you got the decorations and all that up, and while you don't see like farmland or anything because it's set outside the city, you do make up for that because of, you utilizing an arcade or a bowling alley or a miniature golf course within the film. And I don't know if they chose to do that because of budget, but this stuff ruled. And it looked really cool. And I'm going to say this about the kills. I haven't even talked about that yet. While we'll get into some negatives with them very shortly, I will say there are some creative ways people die in this movie. And there's one specific death involving a golf course, and like those water mills and the turbines that turn and all that. I was not expecting that direction for the kill. I didn't really like the execution of it, but that was a really cool idea. That was a really cool idea, and I have to tip my hat to him. Good stuff and a lot of potential. And I don't know if some of this stuff was held back because of budget, or maybe Jake Jarvie being a full first-time, feature film director, and maybe he was kind of afraid of some stuff being, a little too out there to get the movie picked up from a studio or something. I don't know. But I'll start off with the negatives now and say that, we might as well start with the kills. The kills appeared to be neutered, and I can tell. And it's so weird and strange to think that kills were neutered in a low-budget movie, because when you're low budget, you really have to shoot for the stars with the gore. And I don't know if it was they didn't have the budget to pull off exactly what they wanted to do, so they took some shortcuts or something. But the kills, every single one of them, had some type of weird editing going on, trying to cut away and cut back and cut away for being too graphic. I don't know why that was the case. Some people might think that, hey, they didn't have the budget to pull it off. I genuinely think that some things were edited out, because I can clearly tell they put a lot of effort into setting up some of these kills. And when you see the kills, a lot of them, if not all of them, just kind of deflate, right? Because you don't see enough gore there. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say this, but we live in the time post Terrifier, right? If you've seen the Terrifier movies, if you've seen Saw films for that matter, everybody expects gore these days. And I don't know, maybe there's some beauty in the mystique of seeing somebody getting murdered, but only seeing like half of it, and you can use your mind to fill in the rest. I get that, but I wish the film showcased what it brought, because the setups to these kills were great. I just didn't really feel they were all that cool because of the execution of them, sadly. So yeah, there's that one for negatives. My next negative with it is the script itself, mainly involving the killer. I was vibing the first half of the movie. It's kind of a slow burn, and there's some random killings going on here and there that make the movie kind of tense. But once you get around after that halfway hurdle and you start building up towards the climax, and we start to, get to the random killer reveal that happens before the climax, it's so weird, and it's such an odd direction to do that. And I'm like, okay, there must be a reason why they're introducing the killer here to the audience, and we know who they are before they go into the climax, because there has to be some underlying motive here for the killer to be doing what they're doing. And when we get, quote unquote, the motive, I really don't know what they were trying to do with the killer here. I am actually really dumbfounded on that aspect of it, because I've been trying to think, like, why is he killing people? It could be sacrificial related. It could be the spirit of Halloween. It could be he's psychotic. Who knows? It's so vague. It's just kind of mind-boggling. And sticking with the script issues, the main character, while she's good, like while the actress is good and while she's kind of relatable in some aspects, she is like reduced to a side character in the climax. And we see the whole rest of the surviving cast of characters come into play, and she randomly shows up by the end of the climax to stop the killer. And she's not even the real person, I guess, to really absolve the situation when you think about it. And you're just like, okay, then why did we spend so much focus on her throughout the entire movie? Yeah. And I've already brought up the ending when I did the plot overview. The ending is really corny, and the movie abruptly ends, and you're just like, wow, really? And it ends on the corny note, and I'm just not a fan of that. But yeah, overall, the script needed some work. And if I had one last, like, really noticeable negative for this movie, I'm just going to say this up front. There is a fine line between a good low budget and a bad low budget. And I'm not saying this movie is a bad low budget movie on the whole here. But what I do feel that this movie really does lack, it does lack a polishedness to it. It's not really a polished film. And I've seen a lot of low budget movies that are pretty much as good as this one that I do find to be good films that are unpolished, but when they're unpolished, that does kind of affect revisitability. Now, I probably would go back and rewatch this movie, but I can't speak for the average moviegoer or horror fan that maybe comes across this movie and watches it. I can't really speak on if they're going to come back to it, right? And that's a shame because, like I said earlier in the positives, Jake Jarvie, he's a talented director and all that. And I think a lot of it has to do with, because this film feels so unpolished, with the editing of the kills, the editing sometimes in general, and with the script, it's not going to have that much revisitability, sadly. And for me, that does weigh a lot more these days than it used to with these films. Because if I can see myself rewatching it and wanting to rewatch it, that's where I know I'm in love with the movie. I didn't really come out loving this film overall, sadly, but I did like it. I liked it enough to give it a positive rating. So now we're in my score overall for the film. Given those negatives, they did kind of add up. And I decided to be fairer on this because this was a first-time director, and he did really impress me with some camera work in this movie. And I really liked, the slice of life aspect, how natural the characters felt, how good the acting was, surprisingly, for pretty much no-name actors and nobody really knows. And the setting was really cool. I'd probably give this movie like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's not one of the greatest 2024 horror films ever, or in the past 20 years, but it's a solid watch. And I honestly think that if you're just a fan on good filmmaking, if you like the fall atmosphere, if you like haunted house attractions, or the haunt fest kind of locations where you go into you pay to get into a house, or wherever, and you got these paid actors on the venue scaring you, you're going to probably enjoy this movie. And if anything else, just go into it trying to see what this filmmaker can do, and tell me after watching it that you honestly can't see this guy having a good film career with a bigger budget stuff and doing more polished scripts, because I think Jake Jarvie could really do that. And yeah, that's just my thoughts, but that's how I feel about Haunt Season. So yeah, let me know down in the comment section if you've watched Haunt Season. Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.